Hi everybody, this is Mr. Zoeller, and today I'm going to be presenting to you a screencast on Road to Revolution, Resistance to Taxes. So for the objective for the screencast, you should be able to describe the different means by which colonists tried to resist British attempts to tax them. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is the Boston Massacre. So the British soldiers were not very welcome in Boston, and soldiers on the street were often being assaulted verbally by words, but also through acts of violence. And so on March 5th, 1770, a lone British soldier was surrounded by an angry mob who started throwing objects at him. And then other British soldiers arrived, and one fired into the crowd. And as a result, the rest of the soldiers are going to fire onto the crowd, and in the end, 5 men are going to be killed, with many in 1770. So it was going to be African American, a former slave, who's the first one to die for the rebel cause, the patriot cause. And so taking a look at this picture here, in what ways is the picture not a realistic depiction of the Boston Massacre? In what ways is this picture designed to make colonists angry against the British? I want you to pause and think about that for a little bit. Alright, so if we're looking at what's not realistic about this picture, if you look over here at the side with the colonists, you don't see them using, they don't have anything that they could use to attack the soldiers with. You don't see any clubs, you don't see any rocks, you don't see any ice. At that time it was really cold. And then over here on the soldiers' side, the redcoats, you can see Captain Preston over here, the sword drawn, giving the order to fire. And so it looks like they're firing into an unarmed, defenseless crowd. So in reality, that's not really what happened, but this drawing and this engraving done by Paul Revere is showing that the fault was with the British, and that this could happen in your colony. The soldiers might end up murdering innocent people that are just protesting. And so this is going to get colonists riled up against the British all across the 13 colonies. So here's something you can look at in regards to the Boston Massacre. Next, let's look at the Boston Tea Party. So for the Boston Tea Party, feel free to pause if you need to look over this more carefully. So to reduce tensions in the colonies, Parliament repealed almost all of the Townshend Acts. Remember, those were the taxes on British goods. However, it kept the tax on tea. So British officials knew that the colonial demand for tea was high despite the boycott. But colonial merchants were smuggling most of this imported tea and paying no duty on it. Remember, duty means a tax. The British East India Company offered Parliament a solution. The company had huge amounts of tea, but was not allowed to sell it directly to the colonists. If the company could sell directly to the colonists, it could charge low prices and still make money. Cheaper tea might encourage colonists to stop smuggling. Less smuggling would result in more tax money. So Parliament agreed and passed the Tea Act in 1773, which allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonists. Many colonial merchants and smugglers feared that the British East India Company's cheap tea would put them out of business. As a result, colonists united against the Tea Act. 3 ships loaded with tea from the British East India Company arrived in Boston Harbor in 1773. The Sons of Liberty demanded that the ships leave, but the governor of Massachusetts would not let the ships leave without paying the duty or tax. Unsure of what to do, the captains waited in the harbor. On the night of December 16, 1773, colonists disguised as Indians sneaked onto 3 tea-filled ships, about 150 colonists altogether. After dumping over 340 tea chests into Boston Harbor, the colonists headed home to remove their disguises. This event became known as the Boston Tea Party. Soon the streets echoed with shouts of "Boston Harbor is a teapot tonight." So this was a way where the colonists were protesting, saying, you know what, we keep sending letters to the British asking. So here's a drawing showing the dumping of the tea in the Boston Harbor. And the colonists were wearing Native American disguises just to kind of conceal their identity. The British soldiers knew they weren't actual Native Americans that were doing this. So what's the response of the British to this? Well, to punish Boston, Parliament passed what's called the Coercion Acts. And the colonists are going to end up calling these the Intolerable Acts because they can't tolerate living under these conditions. So the acts had the following effects. So number 1, the port of Boston was closed. That means no ships can enter and then no ships can leave. So that's going to starve out the city that relies on that shipping for all of their businesses, food coming in. So that's going to be a huge dent on their way of life. The Massachusetts Charter was canceled. That's the royal charter for permission to have the colony. Royal officials accused of crimes were sent to England for trial to face a more friendly jury, basically saying that the Massachusetts juries were not fair and that the trials in Massachusetts, the colony, and Boston wouldn't be fair. Colonists were required to house British soldiers in their homes. That means you had to give up living quarters for a soldier to stay in your house, provide for them. And then Thomas General Gage is now the governor of Massachusetts. So you have a military ruler, a general of the British Army, who's now the governor of the entire colony. And he's going to have complete authority over the people. So there's no legislature now in Massachusetts. The people have no voice at all. They are under complete control of the British.
The government quickly passed laws intended to punish the Massachusetts Bay Colony and to force its citizens into obedience. In America, these laws came to be known as the Intolerable Acts because they made living in Massachusetts extremely difficult. As a result of the Intolerable Acts, extra troops were sent to the colony to maintain order. Boston's harbor was shut down. Trade suffered badly. And the Massachusetts legislature was suspended, disrupting the colony's government. Immediately, committees of correspondence sent off letters. They warned of what might happen if Britain suspended other colonial legislatures, and suggested that representatives from every colony meet to find ways of resisting the Intolerable Acts.
And so the colonists are going to see that they're being taken advantage of by the British with these acts, and they're not going to tolerate it. And what we're going to find out, this is going to lead to the rest of the colonies coming to Massachusetts' aid and trying to help them out. They see Massachusetts as a martyr who's being sacrificed for their beliefs in the rights of English people, which is the right of self-government, having a voice in your government. And this is the big event, the Intolerable Acts and the Boston Tea Party, that are really going to start to unite the 13 colonies against the British Empire.